Today we're going to talk about resolution, but not like the resolution I made in 2015 to stop selling human organs on the black market, or the resolution I made in 2016 to stop eating the organs I was no longer selling on the black market. We're going to talk about resolution in music, and specifically how we can use dominant 7 chords to achieve resolution. So what is resolution? Technically, what it is when you take a dissonant sound and make it, kind of take it home and kind of give it like I kind of think of it as like a fitting ending, right? Like if you play just like a G7 chord, there's tension there. There's like a slight dissonance where it's not over and it just bothers you until you kind of hit like the tonic or the 1 chord, right? So what I played there was a C major to resolve that G7. We have G7, and then it resolves on a C. Right? It's kind of like a fitting end, right? Now the reason that this is, it always happens on the 5 chord if you're talking about like a major key or something like that, right? So if we're in the key of C, C is 1, D is 2, E is 3, F is 4, and G is 5. That 5 chord is where the dominant 7 chord exists. That's why G7 you'll see a lot in songs with the C. It's usually right before a C chord because that chord isn't done. It's kind of like a jerk move to end a song on a dominant 7 chord. You need to resolve it. I mean, you don't need to resolve it, but it's a good idea to kind of think about if you care about who's listening to your music at all. All right, so why is this? Where's the dissonance coming from? If you saw my video on dominant 7 chords and how to make them, you'll know that really a dominant 7 chord is just a major chord with a minor 7. That's why it's very common in like blues music to see like a lot of like where everything is kind of like a 7 chord because, as our buddy Ian likes to say all the time, the blues music is the minor scale over a major chord. What's minor about a dominant 7 chord is that 7th note. Like if we look at the key of C, which are just all the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, the G chord is really a G major chord, a G7 chord is a G, a B, a D, and then that note right there, that F, makes it kind of dissonant, right? And that's where the resolution comes into. So something to think about if you have ambitions to write songs and stuff like that. How you get home, kind of throwing the song on its side a little bit, is incorporating dominant 7 chords in your playing. But that's not really all I want to talk about, because I want to talk about how you can resolve on like a minor key too, right? So for instance, let's take that same key of C, but let's really use it, let's think of it as the key of A minor, which again, A minor and C major are the exact same notes, so the same chords populate them if you're not going outside of the key. But this is kind of like an interesting way where you can use dominant 7 chords to go outside of the key. So what I mean by that is let's take a progression where we start with an A minor, and then maybe like a C, and then a G7. Right? If we use the dominant chord in there and try to end and resolve on A minor, if that's where our tonal center is, it ends up sounding like this. So the A minor to C. It doesn't totally sound like it resolves there. You still might want to go to the C to make it major. So in my opinion, the presence of a dominant 7 on the 5 chord is kind of tough to resolve on the minor chord in the key, which is the 6th note, the relative minor. So that's kind of one thing to think about. How do you resolve on a minor chord? And this is where taking a minor chord's dominant kind of partner chord comes in handy, and it still happens on the 5. So if you think of A, right, and if we think of in the key of A minor, we have A, B, C, D, E. So the 5th of an A is an E. Now in the key of C, E's chord is an E minor. So if you wanted to kind of like set an A minor up to resolve somewhere, you could always go E minor to A minor, and you can kind of just hear that so there's a G7 to an A minor or an E minor to an A minor, right? They kind of give you different types of resolution because there are different types of resolution. It's not always about going home. There are different ways you can perceive it. And kind of how you perceive that is what could give you like a voice as like a composer, a arranger, a songwriter, something like that. But now if we're going outside of the key, we can take a minor chord's dominant 7 and kind of use it that way, right? So we said that the 5 of A minor is an E, but the 5 of A major is going to be an E major, right? So like if we were in the key of A major, its dominant chord, just kind of how we talked about with the G7 and the C, would be an E7. So like an E7, which you probably know this one, it's 2A, open D, 1G. kind of resolves on an A, right? But the cool thing is if you want to use it outside of a scale, we can use the same E7 chord to resolve on an A minor. Even though an E7 chord isn't in the key of A minor if you use the notes diatonically, so to speak, you can always get around by using a dominant 7 chord in a different spot to achieve that same type of resolution, right? So if we have that same progression where we have like an A minor and a C and a G, I kind of snuck that E7 in there real quick, even though it's not in the scale because I have this note, this G sharp. G sharp is not in the key of C or the key of A minor. You can sneak it in there real quick to add a dissonance that resolves on the minor chord that you're in. And you can do this with anything. So if you want to kind of like maybe go outside of a key or like borrow a chord, some people use that terminology to do that. You can always do that with the dominant 7 chord. And different chord voicings will really help you out with this, especially if you're doing key changes. It's a great way to kind of leave and come back to somewhere, right? Like for example, let's take a different chord progression, maybe like something in the key of D, right? And we'll do it with like bar chords down the neck. So if we have like a D to a B minor, the 5 of D would be A, D, E, F, G, A, right? So the natural thing to think would be like, okay, I want to create dissonance. I'm going to add this A7 and then resolve on the D, right? But let's say that like you really want to kind of like work that B in. Where would you find that, right? So you look at a B, and then you kind of like, so here's a B right here. And where is this 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can kind of see that this ends up being the 9th fret on the A string, which is an F sharp, right? So you could add an F sharp dominant 7 and then resolve that on a B minor. Or you could add the A to the D, right? So that's kind of like a good example of kind of being in the same realm, the same space kind of thinking, even though you're going outside of the key and getting different types of resolution. So we've got this F sharp 7 to a B minor, and then an A7 to a D major. And kind of like just making these like little kind of changes within a composition, I think can make a big difference in your playing. And to kind of get away from everything sounding the same with like open chords and stuff like that too. So it's just one thing to think about, and you can kind of go on and go to like dominant 9 chords, stuff like that. But I think using dominant 7 chords and just throwing them around the neck, even if they're not in the key you're working with, is a great way to start understanding the relationship between different chords and stuff like that. Maybe you want to like end something on what's called the subdominant, which would be the 4 chord, right? So there's just like a lot of different things, and knowing the terminology and kind of knowing how they work traditionally is a great way to open up a gateway into songwriting or composition, or just kind of like playing more fluidly all over the neck.